welcome to the show, Ryan Cooper. He's a managing editor at the American Prospect. Wrote a great book called How Are You Going to Pay for That, which you should all check out. He also hosts a podcast called Left Anchor. And I'm really happy to have you here today, Ryan. Thanks for coming on.
My pleasure.
I'm especially happy to have you because, when we were first planning on having you coming on, I feel like we were living in a different world. I've kind of got whiplash over here since Tuesday. I just before logging on here, I was watching Marjorie Taylor Greene on CNN, and she was praising Nancy Pelosi, and she was talking about how she's tired of the toxic nature of politics, and so I am just I'm trying to get used to this new world post Tuesday. So I'm glad you're here to help us make sense of it a little bit, because things have changed rapidly. And if for anyone who's not aware, there was a off-year election and a little mini blue wave here. Obviously, Zoran Mamdani was the big story, but then you had people like Abigail Spanberger, Mikey Sherrill in New Jersey, Prop 50 in California, all kinds of down ballot things. Pennsylvania election, which we'll talk about. And so I guess my first question for you is just, did you anticipate this? And if so, why? And kind of what are your major broad takeaways from this?
Since 2016, I've tried not to get into the election predicting business too much. I've been burned on that repeatedly. However, I definitely anticipated some kind of backlash to Trump, because that's exactly what we saw last time. That, he snuck in there and then he screwed everything up. And then people were like, dang, this sucks. Better vote for the other party.
Right.
And this time it's been much worse. Like I think people kind of tend to forget, he did a lot of terrible stuff in 2017 to 2020. I mean, especially overthrowing the government. But aside from that, the last thing, butchered the COVID pandemic response, of course. But like a lot of, Andrew Cuomo did that too, almost as bad as Trump. But, before that, he really wasn't a lot of huge changes to American society for most people. We didn't see anything like what's happening now with like air traffic, the whole airline system being completely messed up, massive tariffs, trade war with everyone. That's really biting in, and like a just full on Gestapo raid where they're literally like dragging, preschool teachers out of their classrooms. Tackling 67-year-old senior citizens, Americans, breaking 6 of their ribs. And so, I was not surprised to see a victory, but I was surprised at the scale of it, especially like New Jersey. The polls are showing it neck and neck. It ended up being like 15 points, I think, 16 points, something like that. Total blowout, huge blowout in Virginia. They won almost 2/3 of the seats in the House of Delegates. And I think that, the how much elites have capitulated to Trump this time really obscures how much the average people are really ticked off about everything that's happening.
New Jersey surprised me as well. I grew up in New Jersey, and I grew up in the, if you look at the 2 counties, there's Monmouth and Ocean County, and it's the very red spot in New Jersey. So I always am fearful of New Jersey because my recollection of New Jersey is just this, this suburban backlash to, Obama and all of that. But Mikey Sherrill was able to pull it out, and I guess that's my, I'm very curious what you think. Is this from what you're talking about, you're more talking about Trump, this being more of an answer to Trump than a, support for Democrats. It seems like people went out to vote against Trump and Trumpism, and all of those things you're talking about. I mean, this is the guy who put out an AI video of him spraying shit all over Americans.
Why does nobody like me?
And bigger than that, promises, which people probably voted on, like lowering prices. That's not happening for people. People are experiencing higher prices. As you described, I don't think anyone was prepared for the ugliness of the ICE raids, all of that. And even, the Epstein files, anyone who was voting for that, not only are they not getting that, they're finding out maybe this guy was writing full-on love letters to Jeffrey Epstein. It's a very strange thing. But is this more of a rejection of Trumpism, or are people actually getting excited about Democrats, do you think?
I would say it's, maybe 50-50 thereabouts, because like people have been trying to draw a big distinction between, Zoran and Mikey Sherrill and Abigail Spanberger, the moderate women on the one side, and then the supposedly radical Democratic Socialists. And there definitely are some policy disagreements there, but they all more or less ran similar campaigns that were sort of tailored to their constituencies. It was all about affordability and confronting, Trumpist autocracy. And so in Virginia, that looked a lot like, the price of housing and, the fact that Trump has fired all the federal workers who make up, like a quarter or something of the employees of Virginia. Just the federal government is
Right.
such a huge, important sector of just the Virginia economy. In New Jersey, it was more, tariffs and housing again. And New York City, housing, but also, halalflation, that sort of thing. And so there's a message there that I think, you can say that, Zoran's definitely on the more radical side, but, I think that the Democrats have, outside of the congressional leadership, Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer, they've developed a reasonably compelling pitch that, basically we need to like fix the economy and we need to, get Trump out of, stop his abuses of power. Kamala Harris warned during the campaign that she's going to destroy our democracy and like ruin things for everybody. And I think a lot of people scoffed at that. And now a lot of people are realizing, oh, right. Yes, of course.
I mean, it's funny you bring up Mikey Sherrill and the differences between Zoran Mamdani. I don't know if you saw this clip. I think I can play it for us. I'd love your reaction because it is shocking to hear someone who's considered more of a centrist mainstream Democrat talk in this way. And let me see if I can just pull this up for us.
I am fighting for you. I'm fighting for affordability. I'm fighting to get your costs down. I'm declaring a state of emergency on day one, freezing utility rate hikes. I said last night, you know what? I'm not playing. Right? I'm not doing a 10-year study. I'm not writing a strongly worded letter. I'm not going to convene a group. I'm declaring a state of emergency to drive your costs down. And that's.
I think if I didn't play it for you and I just read the quote, it almost would have sounded like something that could have come from Zoran Mamdani's campaign or something. They're not playing around anymore. They mean business. We're doing a state of emergency. We're not running studies anymore. We're lowering your cost immediately.
Yeah, you could like President Biden was one of the more successful Democrats in terms of getting policy passed of the last like 6 years. But one thing he did with the question of Supreme Court reform was to just punt to a blue ribbon commission who sat around and, twiddled their thumbs for a few months and then came out and said, oh, let's not do anything. And then the Supreme Court proceeded to like strike down everything Biden tried to do in terms of executive actions and stuff. And so I think, you could say, yeah, it's time to stop like, beating around the bush and being timid and hesitant all the time and like actually try and make some moves. It's a new generation. I think it's not a coincidence that, these folks, all three of them are clearly not 10,000 years old, like Joe Biden, like Chuck Schumer. It's, a new generation coming.
It obviously is my hope that it is more, there is some genuine enthusiasm over Democrats, and it's not just a backlash to Trump. I am a little worried. This was actually from the American Prospect. It was your colleague, Harold Meyerson, talking about this little blue wave. He said, when voters in Virginia and New Jersey were asked by exit pollsters for their views of the Democratic Party, they weren't exactly effusive. In New Jersey, 47% said they had a favorable impression. 50% said their impression was unfavorable. In Virginia, it was 45% favorable to 52% unfavorable. So, I mean, obviously they got to get some of these things actually done, so it's not just, we don't just continue this spiral of, okay, kick those guys out. Let's try something new. And there does seem to be kind of this, as much as there are some similarities here between Mikey Sherrill and Zoran Mamdani, it does seem like there is a real, there's a lot of hay being made about this, the future of the Democratic Party. Who's going to be responsible for setting the tone. You obviously see that there's a lot of people trying to pretend like maybe Zoran Mamdani just didn't happen. I think, I'm not sure if you've seen Pete Buttigieg and people like Cory Booker doing all their kind of congrats for the array of Democrats who have won, but just completely silent on the fact that Zoran Mamdani won. Have you seen any?
Oh, yeah. We're definitely not quit of, Clintonite centrism, Rahm Emanuel, that type of person. But I do think, it's going to there's going to be a battle over this. You do see the various forces of centrism, quote unquote centrism, which is not really meaningfully the center of anything. The Matt Iglesiases of the world who want to, who just think that moderation is the key to victory. And if you just moderate more, if Kamala Harris had campaigned with Liz Cheney and her father, that maybe that would have solved it for her. But I think the real divide in the party and the most important fight is not going to be about like ideology or policy per se, like specifics, like do we freeze the rent or do we build more homes, or do we do both, as Zoran Mamdani has proposed. But it's going to be about do we have the stomach necessary to undertake the very serious political reforms and basically, campaign of punishment against Trumpist criminals that is going to have to happen to keep this, as a democratic republic, as a going concern. There's going to have to be some drastic action taken. And I think this is why this was by far the greatest failure of the Biden administration, and the reason why he just is basically all of his climate stuff is in the garbage. That's his legacy. He needed to get Trump, and he didn't. He refused to do it. He thought he could sweep it under the rug, and we could all pretend like it never happened. The whole putsch thing, and everything would go back to normal, and we could pretend like it's the 1970s again. And it was a disaster, a catastrophic decision.
Is that kind of a reference to, like Merrick Garland's failure to prosecute?
He had one job, get Trump, and he didn't do it. He frittered away 4 years, longer than it took the U.S. to win World War II, to get a guy whose crimes were committed on live television, who key pieces of evidence, like the phone call to Raffensperger in Georgia, was published on January 3rd, before January 6th. And there's a piece in MSNBC just reporting how he's just like compulsively dithering and procrastinating and putting things on hold for fear of looking partisan. And the effect of that, of course, was to give Trump the type of get out of pre-trial detention card that no other defendant would give. Is to give him special privileges because he's rich and powerful. And those rich and powerful people are going to have to be confronted in a much more vigorous fashion. And then there's a lot more of them this time, because you're talking about whole swaths of the tech sector, tech elites, Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, Mark Andreessen. All these guys are implicated probably in what happened. And, the centrists, I think this is going to be their failure, because it's like, all right, I could argue about policy all day, but what we need to do is clean house. And are you willing to clean house? I doubt it.
Right. So what does that look like, these kind of drastic measures you're talking about? If obviously this is just a very small start, right? This is, 2026 will be the midterms. And if they do kind of wrest some power back, I mean, what would you like to see happen to make sure, this kind of long national nightmare can be something we can just sweep behind us?
I mean, congressional investigations is where you would start, I think. You can't really do that much in terms of law enforcement until you win back the presidency. But governors could do some stuff. And Zoran was saying, like, ICE agents, we're going to enforce the law here. And, there are certain rules about how you can apprehend people. You need a warrant and so on. And you can't just be like, jumping people out of nowhere. That's excessive force and that sort of thing. But I think that if the presidency is ever won back, there's going to have to be a great big prosecution of all the crimes that have been committed. We've seen them. We've seen them all happen. There's all the stuff about, not spending congressionally authorized money, privacy breaches, all the stuff Doge did, uploading all of the Social Security database to an unsecured cloud server. That's very illegal. Like, a lot of people need to go to jail. I'm not a lawyer, but there's no need for allegedlys for a lot of this stuff. And
I mean, they were bragging about a lot of the stuff.
Yeah. And I think that we need to put the fear of God into these people, because they think that they can just do whatever they want, because hitherto that's been true. You could just break the law. That's what George W. Bush did with the torture program, and Barack Obama was too chicken to get him for it. And then Joe Biden was too chicken to get Trump for much worse crimes, crimes against the very nature of our society as a democratic republic. And now it's like, well, we're going to have to set some more examples. And it's not any type of like extrajudicial anything necessary. These are crimes that were all committed in public. The statutes are on the books. All you got to do is enforce the law against rich and powerful people. And that's, what I'm looking to see.
You mentioned Zoran. I do want to make sure we don't miss this, because, I mean, this is... This feels like, the story of these elections for me. 34 years old, openly, proudly socialist, basically had to go to war with the Democratic Party. He beat Andrew Cuomo not once but twice, and did it all without institutional mainstream backing. You wrote an article that many people have sent to me now, and I had to be like, I'm actually going to talk to him. It's called "America's Dumbest Billionaires Fail to Stop Mamdani." I mean, maybe you could talk about a little bit about what he was up against here with our dumbest billionaires.
Yeah, I mean, you had a huge fraction of Wall Street capital, Silicon Valley capital, Bill Ackman, Michael Bloomberg, who are those guys, the Lairs, the makeup fortune lauders, but a whole, like 24 odd billionaires who donated $100,000 or more to stop Zoran.
Some who weren't even in New York City, the Waltons.
Yeah, Alice Walton. Bill Ackman, this Curtis Sliwa was making fun of him. It's like, he lives in Chappaqua, which is the whitest suburb in America, where even the lawn jockeys are white. And what you see, I mean, so that is objectively an incredible advantage to have tons and tons of money in politics. Like, that's just practically a necessity at this point. And Zoran had to raise a ton of money too, but that came with the strings attached of, well, first of all, they picked a really terrible candidate, Andrew Cuomo, a guy who just a couple of years ago resigned in disgrace after having been credibly accused of sexual harassment of 13 different people, and who, plainly has no like vision or argument for why he wanted to be mayor, other than like, I can get stuff done. What stuff? Well, I'm not telling you. And so, they ran this with a poor candidate, an incredibly inept campaign, and they tried to make it all about Israel. That was their central argument. And, not only was that racist, but if you look at the polling, like who do Democratic voters sympathize with more, the Israelis or the Palestinians? And that's shifted in the polling towards Palestinians by more than 70 percentage points over the last 2 years, since October 7. You had like a big burst of sympathy for Israelis for obvious reasons after the horrible attacks. And then a very much bigger shift in the other direction after the much, much worse, genocide in Gaza. And apparently these guys didn't even notice. They're like, oh, yeah, Americans, they just love Israel. And what we need, it was comical. You had them pressing Zoran. What foreign countries are you going to go visit Israel? And he's like, I'm going to stay in New York because mayors. So that's my job. I'm staying in New York to work on New York stuff. And I don't think he actually mentioned this, but I do believe that Zoran would not be allowed to visit Israel because, it's the only democracy in the Middle East. They will ban people from traveling there if they have said certain things. I think if they support BDS, you could be blacklisted from the country. And they're incredibly racist in their travel, too. So if you're a brown Muslim, you would be well advised to stay away from Israel anyways, even if you aren't blacklisted.
Right. This is the first time I think I have heard the case that he may not even be allowed to enter.
Yeah, and it's I think anybody watching this, regardless of your opinion on Israel, would have been like, well, okay, whatever. Like, let's talk about something that matters to me. Like whether Zoran goes to Tel Aviv or not doesn't impact my rent in the slightest. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about New York stuff because that's the job. Like.
Yeah, I mean, I do. I think it backfired on them tremendously, and I think it's a real indicator of how far we've come, because I think probably just a few years ago this would have worked on him. These false smears of anti-Semitism and all of this, and I think it's I think if anything, it was the opposite. I think people were turned off. I think they were going, you guys, you sound insane. I don't. What are you talking about? I don't care if this guy goes over there.
Yeah, I mean, just elementary political malpractice, in that they were raising the salience of an issue in which their position was unpopular. It's like I said in the piece, it's like as if in 2008, John McCain was running around yelling about how Barack Obama wants to make healthcare more affordable. It's ridiculous.
But yeah, I mean, there was obviously a lot of pressure on this one. I probably fell for some. I think you've left Twitter for Blue Sky, but you missed a nerve-wracking early voting cycle on Twitter, because a lot of people took note that maybe Elon was putting his thumb on the scale, because for everything leading up to it, it felt like Zoran Mamdani had it in the bag. But all of a sudden, once early voting started, if you logged onto Twitter, it started to feel like Cuomo was having some kind of resurgence. Everything I was engaging with was like, wow, Cuomo is doing incredible. People love it so much so that I was like, wow, I can't believe after all this. And, obviously, it would have been a big blow to progressive movements. I mean, you're talking about, if Zoran couldn't get over the finish line, I mean, a guy with like legendary charisma, this guy feels like he was born to do it. He's energized an incredible amount of people. I think it was by the end of the campaign, they had marked over 100,000 volunteers who had worked for the campaign, boasting 3 million doors knocked. If he couldn't get it done, I mean, it's just, there's no way to take on the Democratic machine. So, I mean, I'm obviously extremely happy to see it happen. He did all this without the Democratic machine. You actually just wrote a piece about Chuck Schumer, and this was kind of, for you, this was kind of the last straw with Chuck Schumer.
Kind of.
Because it's not just the Zoran thing. I mean, can you explain a little bit more why he is unfit to be the leader of the Democratic Party?
Yeah, I mean, I've been basically calling for Chuck Schumer to be like thrown out of office for more than 10 years now. Even back when Harry Reid was still the leader of the Senate Democratic Caucus. And what, he's always been a, fervent Zionist, which I find quite distasteful and now just outright disgusting. But, what the actual last straw and what led me to believe that he should not be in any sort of position of leadership was back in 2015 when he was trying to derail President Obama's nuclear deal with Iran. And this was something that was just like a incredibly overdue turn in American policy towards the Middle East. To say like we can engage in the region with our former adversaries or with our current adversaries in a diplomatic fashion. We don't have to just like bomb people at random and do horrible 30 years war-esque occupations that kill 1 million people and accomplish nothing except making everything worse for everyone. Pretty much everyone except for Israel partisans and like hardcore neocons who've always wanted to, invade Iran because, Iraq just wasn't enough blood for them, thought that this was a great idea, defuse tensions, will make sure Iran can't get a bomb and, sort of put American Middle East policy on another footing. And Chuck Schumer, when John Boehner, then Speaker of the House, invited Benjamin Netanyahu, to give an address to Congress, arguing that the Iran deal should not happen, Chuck Schumer encouraged Democrats to attend. He praised the speech afterwards, and then he publicly came out against it. It didn't work, but it was the type of, betrayal of the president's foreign policy that, I think is just disqualifying for a member of the Democratic leadership. Like, it's one thing for some kind of, fringe figure, your Jared Goldens or your, Bernie Sanders pre-2016, people to be out there criticizing the party. But like, if you want to lead the party, you should be on side with the sort of bulk where the rest of the party is at. And that's just in keeping with what, it's like Israel doesn't like it, so I don't like it. I don't care what America says. And I don't care what my own party's president says. And they were really mad at each other for a while over this, Obama and Schumer. And now most recently, Schumer almost certainly voted for Andrew Cuomo. Reporters asked him who he voted for, and he dodged the question. I think if he had voted for Zoran, he would have said so. And he was just too ashamed. It would have been humiliating to admit. And he didn't even have the decency to lie about it. He could have said, I voted for Mamdani. He's the party, even if he hadn't done it. That would have been the party man thing.
Is it a bit of a lose-lose for him? I mean, he does have, he does have, as you're talking, these deep Zionist ties. I mean, this is the guy who more recently said that he thinks his main job is keeping the Democrats pro-Israel. So, I mean, would a vote for Mamdani then put him in a even tougher spot with all his big backers?
Well, yeah, but I think he just, more importantly, he just doesn't believe in that. I mean, what is Zionism now? Like, one of the principal attributes of it is intense racism against Palestinians, and Arabs and Muslims more broadly, South Asians or whatever, a Jewish supremacy. And, the fact that Schumer saw this incredibly racist last few days of the, Cuomo campaign, where he was agreeing with the right-wing radio host who said that Mamdani would cheer another 9/11. I think it just tends to show that he agrees with Cuomo about that he doesn't think Muslims should hold elected office, that they shouldn't have the same rights as everyone else, and that Islamophobia and bigotry is not disqualifying for a member of the party.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably another. That's another thing. I forgot to mention, but the absolute turn into racism and Islamophobia in the final days of the election was just, stunning to see. Obviously, extremely disappointing too. To not see mainstream Democrats stepping in to be like, "Whoa, that is not what we're about." Okay, we have policy disagreements, but that is a bridge too far. It turns out it was not a bridge too far, and it was shocking to see.
Oh, it's like a major rift in the caucus, and it would be bad if a rank and file member were doing something like this, but to have a leader doing it is terrible. It's like this is a party coalition made up of like principally non-white men. It's a very diverse coalition of people at the Democratic Party. And it just should not be led by a guy who's super racist, like that's kind of like you're falling at the first hurdle there, Chuck, and you need someone, ironically, like Joe Biden before Gaza was actually pretty good at this. Even maybe kind of accidentally, like coalition management, giving everybody a bone, being respectful to all of the party coalitions, trying to keep everybody on side, everybody pulling in harness. Of course, he is also racist against Palestinians. It just didn't come up as much until Gaza started to happen. And then it was just like all out the window, completely devastated, all of that. But prior to that was like, the design of stuff like the Inflation Reduction Act and the American Rescue Plan. It was like, everybody got a piece. And, we need some, that kind of behavior, that kind of, could do much better than Biden, someone who could rhetorically perform that as well as just with policy.
I do think that stuff is going to probably play a role in some of those stats I was saying about the kind of disfavorability with some of these voters when you bring up the Democratic Party. I mean, it means a lot when the leadership of the party doesn't have the backing of popular, energetic, new life in the party, and not only that it can't even denounce racist, Islamophobic attacks on members of the party. I think I haven't seen him recently or since the election, but I'm sure you've seen. Because people always talk about the approval ratings for Trump and how bad they are, but not too long ago, I mean, there was polling about how people feel about the Democrats, and they were just, on the floor. No one, it's hard to find people with a favorable view of the Democrats.
Yeah. Well, and the reason for that, the reason, there are two reasons why the Democratic Party polls are so bad. Number one is total dominance of conservatives of all parts of media, social media, mainstream media, and of course, right-wing media. Like basically no matter where you turn, people are being fed unending, stream of messaging that the Democratic Party is bad. And, part of that is the fault of the Democratic Party because they have not bothered to stand up a liberal propaganda apparatus as the conservatives have done with their propaganda apparatus. Instead, they spend $5 billion on TV ads during election years. It doesn't really work that well, but that's a separate discussion. The other reason, though, if you look into it, is that Democrats have a really bad approval rating among their own base voters. And that was not true in 2017. People basically, I think, are looking for a much more confrontational attitude to be coming from the party leadership, and they're not getting it. You do have some confrontations happening, but, you look at a guy like Chuck Schumer, who's like 74 years old, and just does not have the media literacy of someone like Zoran Mamdani, who can perform the role. Performance is so important in our horribly broken information environment. You need people who can, work a camera and who can, compose a compelling short form video. God, as I hate saying it, but it's just not. It's not something that really anybody at the top of the party possesses.
Well, even bigger than that, yes, it's, you got to get in front of the camera and do all that. But people got to believe you and they want to see you put it on the line. I think a lot of people were trying to, and again, this just speaks to how I don't think people quite understood how to make Mamdani look bad. People kept posting that video where he's down at Federal Plaza yelling at ICE agents, and people are posting that in opposition to him, like, is this who you want leading New York? And it's like, yes, we want the guy who's telling ICE to fuck off. We like that. That's good. And I'm blanking on the guy's name. It was another Democratic lawmaker complaining, I don't know what we can do. These people want us to, they won't stop until we get arrested. They want us to stand up to all this. It's like, yes, we do. We take this very seriously.
No, I think that speaks to a broader disconnect. You're seeing at all levels of society. You know, like Ed Luce in the Financial Times had a piece the other day talking about, you know, like the decline of American democracy, and said he had talked to a whole bunch of people in like business, ex-military people, you know, the top crust of society, and they're all like, yeah, Trump's tearing everything up, but none of them would go on the record because they're all afraid. You know, and it's disgusting. You know, it's cowardice. These people are chicken shit, and it's a similar thing happening with a lot of the Democratic leadership, where, you know, you expect people when you're running for office, when you would contest, you would put yourself forward as the leader of the Senate Democrats or the leader of a major city or some position like that. You know, a big position in business that you, if necessary, will harness your massive resources to take some risks to preserve the system that you know, you want to command. And we're seeing the opposite of that. We're seeing ordinary people, regular like moms in Chicago in their pajamas out there like screaming in the faces of these ICE thugs who are just like beating people up, random people they picked off the street. The subway throwing guy, the sandwich dude who was, I just noticed right before we started recording, he was acquitted. That guy went to trial. They've charged him with misdemeanor assault for throwing a sandwich. It was the funniest trial I think that has ever happened in an American courtroom. And all of these goons, these ICE goons, talking about how, well, I could smell the onions and the mustard when the sandwich hit my, and you know, that guy, that in a lot of circumstances, if it wasn't so comically ridiculous, you know, that guy probably would have gone to jail just for touching an ICE officer. A lot of times they just lie. You know, they make stuff up. Oh, you were resisting arrest. And we're seeing that level of commitment. Will put their bodies and their freedoms on the line from ordinary rank and file citizens, and just abject capitulation from, you know, all quarters of the media, you know, the New York Times, the you know, the Washington Post, all these business titans who are just tripping over themselves. You know, either they're cowards or they just agree with Trump. They think he's good. They want to see more of it. And, you know, it's pathetic. And what Democrats want someone who stand up for, you know, the people.
I would say if a member of Congress, if there was video of them throwing a sandwich at an ICE officer, maybe they might be president in 2028, I think. So if anyone wants to rocket in popularity, they might take a cue out of that guy's book. I did want to talk a little bit about, because this one, the Pennsylvania election was one that I did not really have an eye on. You've been writing about it. You're in Pennsylvania. You were voting in this election. It, thank God, didn't go the wrong way, but you know, maybe you could just describe a little bit, because it's really illustrative of kind of how scary this is. I mean, we're talking about the federal level, but from state and local, the Republican Party really wants to infiltrate every level of government and make sure that democracy basically cannot rule. And I think there's also a bit of a parallel here with the New York City mayor's race, where you have a billionaire coming in and trying to buy himself an election.
Yeah, Jeff Yass. Yeah, so the background here, by the way, Jeff Yass is a billionaire, richest guy in Pennsylvania. But the background here,
Pennsylvania.
Is that, you know, back in 2010, Republicans swept that election, if you recall. They took control of the Pennsylvania House and Senate and the governor's race. And there's nothing in the Pennsylvania Constitution about how you draw congressional districts. And so what they did was gerrymander the bejesus out of Pennsylvania House districts, such that, you know, 2 years later, in 2012, even though President Obama won the state by 5 points, and Bob Casey, the incumbent senator, won re-election by 9 points. The result, it was like 13-5, something like that. I mean, a massive lopsided Republican advantage in the congressional delegation. And Democrats fought back by taking the Supreme Court. They won the Supreme Court elections in 2015. And the new majority threw out those maps, said they were, you know, violated, you know, the law, equal protection, yada, yada, yada. You know, I mean, this these decisions ultimately don't have much to do with the text of the law. But they mandated fair maps, which were drawn up, and ruled on helped prevent Trump from stealing the election in 2022, stealing the Pennsylvania's electoral votes. 2020, that is, and a whole bunch of other stuff about, trans rights and whatnot. And so these judges were up for retention. I think it's like every 10 years. Yeah, every 10 years, they come up for retention, up or down vote, whether they should get another 10 years. And so Republicans had taken this opportunity to say they're all three of these Democrats who were elected back in 2015, now they're up. And so if you could get them thrown out in the retention vote, the Supreme Court would be deadlocked 2-2. Wouldn't be able to rule on anything, wouldn't be able to protect, the Pennsylvania system from, Republican attacks. And then, of course, you'd have new elections when you try to fill those with Republicans. And the point of, obviously what they're trying to do is go back to the old rigged maps. And the campaign, I mean, the brass balls on these people is really just incredible. They sent out a mailer, one of these YAS-funded groups, that was a picture that was accusing the liberal justices on the Pennsylvania Supreme Court of gerrymandering our districts. And the picture they used was a picture of the Republican gerrymander from 2011. And, chutzpah is like it's like, honestly, you're just straight up, I know you are, but what am I type argument. But so the upshot is, though, that they failed. All the judges were retained. It was like a 2-1 vote, not even close. Most people, this is quite a strange election. Most people don't even know who the justices are. And they just see it like, yeah, sure, I guess. I haven't even heard of this person.
Right. And
so it didn't work. And thank God.
Yeah, all of this, it didn't really work anywhere. All of this stuff failed. In PA, it was bunk election maps. In New York, it was threats of Sharia law and, lies about... there were some people genuinely being like, my mom thinks that if Zoran wins, he's instituting Sharia law. And I think this is all just a massive repudiation of Trumpism, which is obviously encouraging in some aspects. I think, I don't know if you've been following this one, but I think one of the bigger ones I've seen that really supports this is, did you follow I believe it's Jay Jones, the Democrat who was running for Attorney General in Virginia. If you're not familiar with this, because I don't think people were voting for Jay Jones, to be completely honest. This man, he had some leaked texts, which, I think no one would be thrilled about having their texts leaked, but these were quite egregious. Just, fully texting his colleague, a Republican colleague, wishing death upon his colleagues, I think, and getting pretty graphic about it. I think he even mentioned stuff about their children and hoping that they would die as well.
Your classic joke, or it's like if it was another Republican, it's like if you had Hitler and Pol Pot and this guy in a room and you only had 2 bullets, who do you shoot? And you shoot the Republican guy twice. That is a classic joke. To be fair, I don't think I would interpret it as a credible murder threat.
Sure. But still, never looks good from a electoral candidate.
And texting that to a Republican is kind of crazy. Like, what are you doing, man? What are you doing?
Crazy. So yeah, he said these awful things, and there was even some polling at the time when they were leaked. Voters in Virginia, they asked them, do you think this is disqualifying? And they said yes. They said, yes, I think this is disqualifying. But they voted him in. He won his election. He won his election on Tuesday, which is crazy. And I think that really speaks to just how much people are done with Trump. And it's funny, I wanted to talk about kind of where that leaves us in the Democratic Party because of this ongoing feud about the future of the Democratic Party. But from what I'm seeing, I'm also like, this. It's still early, but I'm like, this may change things for Republicans. I've seen, I mean, as we've talked about up top, Marjorie Taylor Greene is a different person. I mean, she was changing before the election. That's a whole other thing. There are people like, I don't know if you saw Vivek Ramaswamy came out immediately and was like, we need to be hammering affordability. He wants his own Mikey Sherrill moment. There was, Deputy Chief of Staff, Trump's James Blair. I saw him on a Politico podcast talking about how, we're going to be hammering affordability. And weirdly enough, there are some Trump truths that have already came out where he's got affordability and big, it's all capitalized. We're making things more affordable for Americans than ever, which I have to say has surprised me. I thought it would be the classic fascist tactic of how do we make sure less people vote? Which there's a little bit of that. I do believe he truthed right after the election. We need voter reform. We need more stronger voter ID laws. We need to get rid of mail-in ballots, all that stuff. So there is that. But do you think there will be any? Do you think that the Republicans in power now are going to take seriously any of this affordability crisis? I mean, I have a hard time seeing that, but
yeah, as a closing comment, I think I would say that it's not so much that Republicans are going to start taking the affordability crisis seriously necessarily. I think they might start talking about it more. But I think that they're going to try to pivot to more traditional policy questions rather than, just like full fascism, white supremacy, and just indulging their most gleefully hateful instincts all the time, and just like laughing, doing like ASMR videos of people being kidnapped and sent to a slave prison in El Salvador, because I think that the Charlie Kirk assassination and now that this Jay Jones guy won, I saw a bunch of tweets from Republicans who are like in Northern Virginia, and they seem like legitimately shocked that people in Northern Virginia, that Jay Jones ran up huge margins. Like he didn't even win by a small amount. It was 6 points. Like that, right. That's a convincing margin. And I think that, Republicans maybe are starting to think about, the fact that it's not necessarily the case that liberals will always be complete wimpy pushovers, that you can just abuse them like you did to Joe Biden without consequence forever, that they might actually, by you coarsening the quality and the norms of politics and eroding all this stuff about, being polite and decent and a minimum standard of responsible behavior among, elected officials, that you're going to start getting elected officials from the other party who are also like, kind of degenerate and talk casually about violence. It's like, yeah, we're all trying to find the guy who introduced, incredible impoliteness and grotesque rudeness into, our politics. And I think it's like Republicans, you made your bed. Now you got to sleep in it. And if you want to, you're going to have a lot to prove if you want to bring back, common decency to our politics, because you are starting at the bottom of a very deep hole indeed.
Right. I know you got to head out, but I really appreciate you coming on and helping us make sense of all this stuff. Do you want to tell people where they can find more of your work one more time?
Yeah, sure. So we're at the American Prospect, prospect.org. You can find, more of my writing there. And I've got the podcast, Left Anchor, leftanchor.com. You can find it there. Subscribe on whatever platform you wish. And yeah, otherwise I'm not on Twitter, but I am on Blue Sky, at ryanlcooper.com. But yeah, say hi.
All right. Thanks so much, Ryan.
Thanks for the invite.